A man used rust remover in a sealed bathroom, his lungs filled with fluid. It was a Saturday afternoon. The bathtub had orange stains around the drain. The bottle he grabbed from the hardware store shelf said rust remover. It did not say chemical weapon. But at the molecular level, that distinction barely exists. JR is a 34-year-old man, presenting to the emergency room with progressive difficulty breathing, blood-tinged froth on his lips, and numb, cramping hands. Roughly 18 hours before arriving at that emergency room, he had been on his knees scrubbing bathtub stains with a commercial cleaning product. That is the entire story. A man cleaned his bathtub and nearly died. Let's break down what each of those symptoms actually means. Dyspnea. Dys meaning difficult, pnea meaning breathing. Difficult breathing. His chest was tightening like a belt being cinched one notch at a time, and each breath moved less air than the one before. The frothy, blood-tinged sputum coming up when he coughed meant that fluid was flooding compartments in his lungs where only air is supposed to be. Not just any fluid. Protein-rich fluid leaking from damaged blood vessels, mixing with air, frothing pink. Then the hands. Perioral numbness, meaning numbness around the mouth, tingling in the fingertips, and carpopedal spasm. Carpo, meaning wrist, pedal, meaning foot, spasm, meaning involuntary contraction. His hands were locking into claws. His body was running out of something it needed to keep muscles under voluntary control. But when JR had finished scrubbing that afternoon, he felt almost nothing, just a tickle in his throat. It is somewhere around 2 in the morning when his wife wakes to the sound of him gasping. He is sitting upright on the edge of the bed, coughing foam that is pink. His fingers are curled inward. He cannot straighten them. He is confused. She calls 911. The paramedics find a 34-year-old man in acute respiratory distress, oxygen saturation falling, skin gray, hands rigid. They intubate him in the ambulance. At the emergency room, the chest X-ray lights up. Bilateral infiltrates. Both lungs, white with fluid where black air should be. The cardiac monitor shows a QTC interval stretched beyond 550 milliseconds. QTC, a measurement of how long the heart's electrical system takes to reset between beats. Normal is under 450. Above 500 is dangerous. Above 550 is the threshold where the heart can slip into a lethal rhythm called torsade de pointe. Torsade de pointe. French for twisting of the points. The heart's electrical signal spirals instead of firing in sequence. It does not pump blood, it quivers. And intermittent runs of ventricular ectopy are already appearing on the monitor. Extra beats fired from the wrong part of the heart. His heart was misfiring. His lungs were drowning. And the only clue was a faint chemical smell still clinging to his shirt. The team does what any emergency team would do. They assume the most common diagnosis: cardiogenic pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs because the heart is failing. They push IV diuretics to pull fluid off the lungs. They titrate oxygen. They watch the monitor. And for a brief window, maybe 30 minutes, it seems to work. His oxygen numbers stabilize. The team exhales. Then the lab results come back. 68 millimoles per liter, 1. His calcium has fallen to a level incompatible with stable cardiac rhythm. The monitor begins alarming again. Longer runs of ectopy. The QTC stretches further. And the echocardiogram shows something that does not fit the working diagnosis at all. His ejection fraction is normal. His heart muscle is squeezing just fine. The valves are competent. BNP, a hormone the heart releases when it is overworked, is barely elevated. This is not heart failure. Standard heart failure protocols were holding back a flood that had nothing to do with his heart. Something was poisoning him from the inside out. To understand what happened, we need to rewind. Saturday morning. JR is a healthy man. Non-smoker, no lung disease, no medications. He notices the rust stains around the bathtub drain that have been bothering him for weeks and decides today is the day. He drives to the hardware store and picks up a bottle of commercial rust remover.
The active ingredient,
printed in small type on the back label, is hydrofluoric acid, HF. Concentration somewhere between 6 and 12%. He reads the directions. Spray, wait, scrub, rinse. He does not read the warnings. He closes the bathroom door because the cat likes to drink out of the tub. The window is painted shut. 90 minutes of scrubbing in a sealed room. He notices a mild tickle in his throat, a small cough. He finishes, takes a shower, has dinner, goes to bed. The normalcy of it is what makes it terrifying. He went to sleep feeling fine. Hydrofluoric acid was already inside his cells, and it had hours of work left to do. Hey, quick question. Are you learning something from this so far? If yes, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next case we break down. Appreciate you being here. Because what hydrofluoric acid does once it crosses a cell membrane is unlike any other acid on Earth. Doctors write a list of problems, and they need to rule each one out. The first candidate on the board is cardiogenic pulmonary edema, acute heart failure. It is plausible. Dyspnea, frothy sputum, bilateral infiltrates on the chest X-ray. That looks like flash pulmonary edema from a failing pump. But the echocardiogram says no. Ejection fraction is normal. Valves are fine. BNP is not markedly elevated. The heart is not the problem. Ruled out. Second candidate, chlorine gas inhalation. This is a classic bathroom injury. People mix bleach with an acid-based cleaner and produce chlorine gas. The symptom profile overlaps significantly. But JR used a single product. He did not mix anything. And chlorine gas causes immediate, intense irritation. Burning eyes, choking, coughing fits within seconds. JR felt almost nothing during those 90 minutes. That delayed latency does not fit chlorine. Ruled out. Third candidate, phosphine or phosgene gas exposure. Both of these are known for causing delayed onset pulmonary edema, hours after inhalation, with a deceptively calm initial period. The timeline fits, but there is no plausible source of phosphine or phosgene in a domestic bathroom. The product label confirms what was in the bottle. Hydrofluoric acid. Ruled out. Fourth candidate, aspiration pneumonitis. If JR had vomited and inhaled his stomach contents, the inflammatory response could produce a similar picture on imaging, but there is no history of vomiting. The infiltrates are bilateral and diffuse, not concentrated in the dependent lung segments where aspirated material would settle. And aspiration cannot explain the crashing calcium. Ruled out. Here is the timescale heuristic that clinicians use. If symptoms hit in seconds, think vascular. If they develop over days to weeks, think infection or inflammation. If they creep over years, think cancer or neurodegeneration. But HF sits in a treacherous middle zone, 6 to 24 hours, too slow to alarm the patient, fast enough to kill overnight. One exposure, one product, one toxin explains both the lungs and the electrolytes. Occam's razor cuts clean. Every road led back to one molecule. A molecule first made 250 years ago by a chemist who would die from his own discoveries. In 1771, in Uppsala, Sweden, a pharmacist and chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele heated a mineral called fluorspar with sulfuric acid inside a glass retort. The acid that formed did something no other acid he had worked with had ever done. It destroyed the glass vessel itself. He had produced aqueous hydrofluoric acid, and in doing so revealed a substance with a unique ability to dissolve silica, the compound that makes glass, glass. Scheele suffered chronic poisoning from his many chemical experiments and died at 43, likely in part from cumulative exposure to the very substances he spent his life discovering. Now here is the paradox that makes HF so dangerous, and it is a paradox that flips most people's mental model of acids completely upside down. Hydrofluoric acid is a weak acid. That means in solution, a large fraction of HF molecules remain undissociated. They do not split into ions. Compare that to hydrochloric acid, HCl, a strong acid that fully dissociates in water. Every molecule breaks into H+ and Cl-. And here is the critical consequence. Charged ions cannot cross lipid bilayers. They are stopped at the surface of the cell membrane like a traveler without a passport. Strong acids burn the outside, they damage the surface, and they stop there. But undissociated HF is small. It is lipophilic, meaning fat-loving. It slips across cell membranes freely, like water through a screen door, and only once it is inside the cell, surrounded by the slightly higher pH of the cytoplasm, does it finally dissociate. It releases its fluoride ion payload deep inside the cell, behind every barrier the body has. A stronger acid would, paradoxically, be safer at the same concentration. HF's weakness is its weapon. In 1856, the French chemist Edmond Fremy produced the first anhydrous HF, pure and water-free. In 1886, Henri Moissan, working in Paris, used HF as the starting material to isolate elemental fluorine for the first time by electrolysis, work that would earn him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1906. And in 1943, the Manhattan Project drove industrial-scale production of HF because it was essential for producing uranium hexafluoride, the gaseous compound used in uranium enrichment. A molecule born in a shattered glass flask in 18th century Sweden became a linchpin of the atomic age. Now, bringing us back to JR's case. Once the ER team identifies hydrofluoric acid as the exposure, the entire clinical picture snaps into focus. The diagnosis is acute chemical pneumonitis progressing to non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema with systemic fluoride toxicity causing life-threatening hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia. Hypo, meaning low, calc, referring to calcium, emia, meaning presence in blood, low calcium presence in blood, and hypomagnesemia, low magnesium presence in blood. Here is the mechanism, step by step. HF vapor was inhaled for 90 minutes in a sealed room. It deposited on the moist alveolar epithelium, the thin, wet lining of the tiny air sacs deep in the lungs. There, the HF molecule, still intact, crossed through the alveolar cells the same way it crosses any lipid membrane. Once inside, it dissociated. The released fluoride ion, F-, grabbed onto calcium and magnesium ions with ferocious affinity, forming insoluble calcium fluoride and magnesium fluoride precipitates. Imagine dropping a sponge into a glass of water. The calcium just vanishes from solution, locked into an insoluble crystal. Gone. The cells, stripped of calcium and magnesium, died. Dead alveolar cells and damaged capillary walls triggered a flood of neutrophils, white blood cells rushing to the scene. Inflammation blew the capillaries open. Protein-rich fluid poured through the gaps and flooded the alveoli. That is the pulmonary edema. Not because the heart failed, because the barrier between blood and air was destroyed, like a garden hose turned on inside his chest. But HF did not stop at the lungs. Fluoride ions crossed the damaged alveolar capillary membrane and entered the bloodstream, 7 millimoles per liter. At that level, the electrical signaling system of the heart destabilizes. The QTC stretches. The risk of torsades de pointes spikes. Cardiac arrest becomes a real and immediate threat. And simultaneously, fluoride-poisoned mitochondrial enzymes, specifically enolase and the sodium-potassium ATPase pump, causing direct energy failure in cardiac muscle cells. The heart was being attacked from two directions at once. Its fuel was cut, and its electrical wiring was haywire. Treatment was aggressive and targeted. Repeated boluses of intravenous calcium gluconate, 1 to 2 grams at a time, pushed directly into the bloodstream to replace what fluoride was stealing. Then a continuous calcium drip to stay ahead of the ongoing depletion. Intravenous magnesium sulfate to restore magnesium. Mechanical ventilation to keep his lungs working while the edema fluid slowly cleared. JR remained on the ventilator for 5 days. The QTC prolongation and the ventricular ectopy resolved as calcium levels normalized. The pulmonary edema cleared gradually over 7 to 10 days. He was discharged from the hospital on day 14. Pulmonary function testing at discharge showed a mild residual restrictive pattern, meaning his lungs could not expand quite as fully as before, like memory foam that had not fully sprung back. Over 3 months, even that improved. At 6 months, full functional recovery. JR walked out of that hospital. But every year, others don't. and nearly every one of those deaths was preventable. 4 things you can do today. First, read the label. If a rust remover lists hydrofluoric acid, HF, ammonium bifluoride, or sodium bifluoride as an ingredient, it is not an ordinary cleaning product. It is an extreme chemical hazard. Treat it that way. Second, ventilation is non-negotiable. Any chemical cleaner, any product, anytime. Open the windows, run the exhaust fan, prop the door open. A sealed room turns a manageable exposure into a lethal one. Third, if you develop even mild throat irritation or chest tightness after using a chemical product, go to the emergency room immediately. Do not wait to see if it gets worse. HF's latent period is a trap. You feel fine for hours while the damage deepens. By the time you feel bad, you may already be in crisis. Fourth, safer alternatives exist. Phosphoric acid-based rust removers like navel jelly or citric acid-based products remove rust effectively and do not carry the risk of systemic fluoride poisoning. You do not need HF to clean a bathtub. Knowledge is the ventilation that keeps you safe. The difference between JR's story and a tragedy was a team that figured out the toxin in time and pushed calcium fast enough to save his heart. But the difference between JR's story and no story at all would have been an open window. Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well.